Okay, so we are here, obviously, to talk about Shavuos. And the real story of Shavuos is about, as it says in the title, purpose and meaning everywhere you turn. So different people probably think of different things when we think of Shavuos. Shavuos is cheesecake. Shavuos is staying up late. Shavuos is Yom Tov and meals with family and friends. Whatever it is, all of these things are true. But what I want to get into is not what do we do on Shavuos, but what is Shavuos actually about behind the scenes? What are the guts, the meaning of Shavuos inside? But not just what's the meaning inside of Shavuos itself, what's the meaning of Shavuos to us? Because we are going into Shavuos. Shavuos is here not just, Shavuos doesn't exist just for the sake of being there. Shavuos is there as an opportunity for us. And Shavuos is actually a really, really, a very deeply special day and a very deeply special Yom Tov. And I want to talk a little bit about the what and the why, about the nefesh, about the soul of Shavuos. So there's a very interesting Maimar Chazal, I guess we could call it, in Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud. It says that after a person passes away, right, and the neshama goes up to Shemayim, the soul goes up to heaven, and has to give an accounting to Hashem for everything that did and didn't do, etc., etc. One of the things that we have to actually account for and justify, the Gemara says there, is anytime we had an opportunity to partake in something and we didn't. So if you're sitting in front of some good kosher food and you could have eaten it and you didn't eat it, Hashem's going to want to know why. Why did you not eat the food that was in front? Now that may seem a little counterintuitive. And obviously there could be many, many valid reasons to not have eaten food. Perhaps I had already eaten that day and it wouldn't have been healthy for me to eat additional calories. And so I chose not to eat it because it was the healthy option. That's a very good justification for not eating food. And obviously there are many, many reasons that we could give to justify, but the initial stance is there was food, you didn't eat it, why not? Justify. Which seems perhaps to be a little bit counterintuitive because that's not what we usually think of as being the Torah perspective on food. You see food, unless you have a good reason not to, you should be eating it, assuming it's kosher and say a bracha, etc. So I want to go on a little bit of a journey and then come back to this at the end. And hopefully at the end of this journey, and this journey being the meaning of Shavuos and the real story of Shavuos, hopefully it'll, by the time we get there and come back to it, hopefully it'll be self-explanatory. So going back in time now, nearly 6,000 years, going back to before creation, before Hashem created the world, before the world existed, there was nothing. There was just Hashem. And then Hashem decided to create time, to create space, then within time and space, to create a universe, and within that universe to create a Milky Way galaxy, and within the Milky Way galaxy to create the planets and to create Earth, and to make Earth in a way that it's inhabitable for animals and for plants and for people. And all of these things happen intentionally, obviously, and with a specific reason, with a specific intention in mind. And that reason is, in the words of the Midrash, to make a dwelling place. Hashem wanted this novelty, something novel. Think about, for example, if you're buying a gift for someone, it's a mistake that people make very often, is seeing something going, oh, that's so cool, I'm going to buy it as a gift for so-and-so. Which may not necessarily be a bad thing, but, oh, wow, that thing looks cool, I'll buy it for so-and-so. What makes me think that because I think it's cool, that makes it a good idea to buy it for someone else? If I look at something and say, ooh, so-and-so would really appreciate that, I'll get it for them as a gift, that's a good way to buy a gift. Oh, this is cool, I'll buy it for so-and-so, without thinking about whether or not so-and-so, who is the recipient of the gift, will appreciate it, is not a very strategic way to buy a gift. Right? The point of buying a gift is to deepen your connection with someone, to express that you're thinking about them and that you care about them, which is why you bought something for them, right? When you buy something for someone, it says, I was thinking of you and I bought something for you. When you buy someone something that clearly, if you'd thought about it for 10 seconds, you would have realized that they're not actually going to be interested in it, and you bought it because you're interested in it, what that says to them was, oh, wow, I was thinking about myself and I thought of you as well and decided to buy you something that was cool for me and not for you. It kind of misses the point. Now, obviously, when you buy someone a gift, that in and of itself has meaning, because the fact is you did think to bring them a gift. But if you want to buy someone a gift, it's a good idea to buy something that's going to be meaningful for them, going to be exciting for them. You know, and when you buy someone a gift that's meaningful for them and they know that you're not interested in it, and it's very clear that you bought it thinking about them and not thinking about yourself, that makes it even more. So now let's just envision this situation where you're buying a gift for someone, and this someone basically can have whatever they want. You're buying something for someone who has a credit card without a limit and a bank account without a limit to pay that credit card at the end of the month. It's going to be very hard to find something that is actually going to be meaningful for them, that they'll appreciate. You know, when you buy something for someone, you know, I'd say that generally one of the better targets for something to buy something for someone as a gift is something that they really want. And it doesn't even have to be something that they can't afford, but something that they're like, yeah, you know, like, I can't really justify spending the money on that, even if it's not that much. If there's, you know, people decide and prioritize. And if you buy something for someone that you know that they want and that you know that they weren't going to spend the money on, that can be really exciting and meaningful. Now, if there's someone that money is effectively irrelevant for, it becomes hard to buy something for them that they're actually going to be excited about. If there's something that someone wanted but they weren't going to get, and then now they get it, that's really exciting. If someone can have anything anytime, it's very hard to get them excited. But if you can find something that money can't buy, if you can find something that's not listed on Amazon or on eBay, and you can get that for someone, that could be exciting for someone, even if they have an unlimited credit card, because it's novel. It's something, the thing that makes things, one of the things that makes things exciting is novelty, the fact that it's something new. And something that money can't buy is going to be novel for someone that has all the money in the world. So if you can find something that's novel by definition, that's going to be exciting. And that's what we are here for. That's what we are here to do. Hashem created the world. Now, you know, there's a question that I sometimes pose to an audience, and the question is, do angels exist? Now, depending on what you mean by your answer, the answers yes and no can both be correct. Depending on what you mean by exist. Right? The reason we don't see angels is not because they're invisible. It's not, they're not transparent. They're not physical entities. They don't physically exist. So if you define existence as things that are made out of atoms, things that are made out of protons, electrons, and neutrons, things that are made out of physical mass and physical energy, then angels actually don't exist. They don't physically exist. They're equally as real as that which does physically exist, but within the framework of physical reality, angels are not a part of that. So we don't see angels not because they're transparent, but because our eyes see physical light, which bounces off physical things, and angels aren't physical things, so we don't see them. They don't physically exist. And the same is true in the reverse. As far as the spiritual is concerned, the material doesn't exist because it's a different reality. We have different realities that exist in different frameworks and different perspectives, and they're on different graphs, and there's no overlap. And if there was some way to then bring the two together, which is a technical impossibility, that would be super exciting. It would be super exciting if you could do the impossible, if you could do the thing that money can't buy. Money can't buy making an angel physically exist because it's a technical impossibility. Money can't get us to mix, to get physical and spiritual to mix, because they exist in different realities. And as far as each one's concerned, the other one doesn't exist. So if we could find a way to do that, that would be a real novelty. That would be truly novel. And that would be super exciting. And that's what we're here to do. So the Midrash says Hashem created the world because he wanted something novel. He wanted something new. Hashem creates the reality of the physical, and Hashem creates the reality of the spiritual. And because of the way Hashem created them, they can't mix. They're separate. They have to be separate by definition. But Hashem did that to give us the opportunity to achieve the impossible. The impossible is to bring them together. The question becomes, how do we do that? So part of that is, or how can that happen? So part of the way that this happens is, as a mashal, I don't know whether I've used this mashal before for this group specifically for you guys, but if you have a court case, let's say, and this is a relatively common phenomenon, you have someone in Brooklyn, they don't speak English, they come to court, they have a court case about something, and the judge speaks English and only English, and this person comes to court and speaks Vietnamese and not a word of English. We have a problem because the judge and the person behind the bench have to speak to each other, and they don't understand each other's languages, and they don't talk each other's languages, so we're stuck. So what do you do? Correct. You get someone who understands both languages, who can speak both languages, and then that person can facilitate communication between both. Yes. Do they? So you can have two people that are at a complete impasse. It's just technical impossibility for them to communicate. All you need is one person who understands and speaks both languages. Boom, you can have communication. All of a sudden, you can have dialogue, and everything can be good. So now, if we have a physical reality, a reality that's made out of physical mass, physical energy, protons, electrons, neutrons, air, water, etc., 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 and there's this spiritual reality which doesn't physically exist, it's non-physical, and we want to be able to bring the two together and get them to interact, what's the solution going to be? It's going to be a facilitator that has a foot in both worlds. So when in Birchas HaShachar, we say the bracha Asher Yotza. And at the end of that bracha, we say, Rofech al basar machli lasos. Blessed is Hashem who heals all flesh, machli lasos, and doesn't really translate strictly into English, but who does wonders, let's say. So the base level meaning of what we're saying there is it's a blessing, thanking Hashem for health. And for anyone who's learned anything about biology, anything about the way the body works, we have, I don't know how many hundreds of billions or trillions of cells in the body at any one time, and different kinds of cells and skin cells and muscle cells, etc., etc., etc. Any one of those cells is probably more complex than the most complex factory that exists in the world. Every one of those cells, if it was the size of this room, would be filled with thousands of things packed in, all interacting with each other, thousands of chemical reactions happening at the same time, and everything in perfect balance. You have DNA, you have things that are processing DNA and proteins, all kinds of things going on. This is just inside of one cell. Imagine the cell the size of this room just filled with thousands of different things going on. And then the body's made up of, I think, trillions of those at any given time. And all of those, and within one cell, there's probably thousands of things happening, all in perfect balance, and everything communicates with each other. All those things are communicating together. And then all the different cells and different tissue types are communicating with each other. So, why someone, God forbid, would be unwell, wouldn't feel well, isn't a question. That's not a wonder. The question is, how is it even fathomable for life to exist for an instant? The amount of just unimaginable complexity and perfection that has to exist in order for life to exist for even an instant is just, it's literally unfathomable. So when we thank Hashem for our health, we say, we bless Hashem, who heals our flesh, it does wonders. But there's another layer of that when we thank Hashem for the wonders that he does. It's not just the wonder of physical health. It's the wonder of the fact that we as people are comprised of a body and a soul. If we were just a body, we wouldn't be us. We'd just effectively kind of be steak. Like that's what a body is without a soul. And if we were souls without a body, we'd kind of look like angels. And neither of them would get much done in terms of changing this world. The problem is that bodies and souls aren't very good at interacting with each other because one exists in a physical reality in which souls don't exist, and one is spiritual, the soul's spiritual, as far as which is concerned, the body doesn't exist. So Hashem does wonders. The Creator says, you know what? I'm going to do something special. I'm going to work some magic. I'm going to bring these two things together. Now, keep in mind that Hashem, the Creator, is the one who created souls and bodies in the way that they can't interact with each other. He's the one who made the rules and said the spiritual is spiritual, physical is physical, they can't interact. You can also say, okay, you know what? In this context, I'm going to bring them together. I'm going to facilitate the communication and interaction between them. So that's what he does. And that's what a person is. So a person is already, and it's not just people, it's animals too, and plants for that matter. But particularly in people, people are, you know, significantly more complex, not necessarily just biologically, perhaps for the most part biologically, we may not necessarily be that much more complex than animals, but in terms of meaning and morals, we have abstract thought that other animals don't have. We have articulate speech that animals don't have, both of which combine to give us the possibility for morality. Animals are not immoral, not because they're too good, but because morality just doesn't even exist for them. They don't have consciousness the way that we do. So there's a whole lot more complexity in us than there is in animals, but in everything that exists, every animal, every plant, certainly every person, there's this combination of body and soul, which is novel, and it shouldn't be possible. But Hashem makes it possible. And that's what we say, mafli lasos, Hashem does wonders. Now, when Hashem does that, and Hashem brings our body and soul together to make us a person, because that's what a person is, person equals body plus soul, human body plus human soul equals human being, just like that cow body plus cow soul equals cow, human body plus human soul equals human being. Hashem does wonders to bring them together so that we can be the facilitators of communication and interaction between the world of body and the world of spirit, the world of the soul. So Hashem takes body, takes soul, puts the two together, even though they shouldn't be able to interact. Hashem says, I am going to make you a person comprised of body and soul so that you can facilitate a relationship between the physical and the spiritual, because we can interact with the world because we have a body. A soul can't interact with the world. A body can. We can move objects. We can do things. We can interact with the world. A soul can't interact with the world, but a soul interacts with the spiritual, with the godly, in a way that the body can't. So because the body and the soul are now partners, when the body interacts with the world, it then allows the spirituality that the soul is in touch with to be channeled through the body and to be able to interact with the world. So because we have body and soul, we are able to facilitate interaction and communication between Gashmias and Ruchnis, because we are made up of Gashmias. So that's part one. Part two is, how do we actually do that? Because, okay, we are facilitators, we have body and soul, but just because we have a body and we have a soul, it doesn't just mean that we are going to bring the two together. There have to be specific actions or tools that we use to do that. That's why we're able to do it, but how do we do it? And this is where Shavuos comes into play. This is where Shavuos is so important, because, you know, Hashem created the world, and there were not millennia, but millennia. There were certainly millennia. There were millennia from when the world was created until the Torah was given. And for all of those years, 2400-ish plus, 2400 plus, going on 2500 years from the creation of the world until Matan Torah, basically all of existence was in beta. It was in beta mode. It was in kind of, you know, it was launched but not yet fully operational. And it was like that in the times of Adam Rishon. It was like that in the time of Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, and the beginning of Moshe Rabbeinu, etc. So the whole world was in beta. Now, what do I mean when I say that the world was in beta? What does it mean? You know, today apps are released in beta and websites are released in beta, and a lot of times when it's released in beta, it's not released necessarily to everyone. It may be released to a select number of people. Sometimes it's released to everyone, but they let you know it's in beta just to let you know why. Because it's not fully operational yet. A lot of times what it means is we have an idea, we're almost there, And a lot of times when you think you're fully there, you're not actually fully there, and then you release it, and then people find bugs and problems, and then you have to start fixing them again. So what they do is they say, you know what, we're not fully perfected yet, but instead of waiting till we think it's perfect, then releasing it, then getting the critical feedback, then having to perfect it and tweak it all over again, let's release it when we're 90% of the way there, so that we start getting feedback already, and we can incorporate the feedback and the perfections and the tweaks into the time that we were anyways spending finishing up and perfecting. So that's what beta is. It's you release something that's pretty much operational, but not fully there yet. And the first 2,500 years of the existence of the world, that's basically what it was. The world was in beta. There was a world of matter, a physical world, with ground and plants and people and animals, etc. And it was almost there because the time had already been created, space had already been created, the universe had already been created, animals, plants, humans, everything had been created. It was almost there. The problem was that the reason all of that was created was with a purpose, so that Hashem, godliness, divinity, spirit should be brought into the world and incorporated into the fabric of a physical reality, which is novel because that's unnatural. But there was no way to do that. So the platform was ready, but it wasn't actually operational yet. It was operational in that the world was functioning and people were living and all kinds of things were happening. But the actual original purpose, the original functionality for which it had been created wasn't operational yet. There was no way to bring matter and spirit together. And we have psukim for this. We have Shamayim Shamayim LaHashem Haaretz Nosem Lifnei Adam. Shamayim Shamayim LaHashem, the heavens, the world of spirit is for Hashem. Haaretz Nosem Lifnei Adam, the world of matter, the physical world, he gave to us to live in. Two separate things. And the interesting thing is that the Gemara says that Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov were learning Torah before the Torah was given, before Matan Torah. They were keeping mitzvah. It says that Rashi says that when Yaakov was heading down to Mitzrayim after the whole story, and Yosef and the brothers, and then Yosef told them who he was, and he sent them back to Yaakov and said, go back and tell our father that I'm alive and bring him down. So Yaakov's now coming down to Mitzrayim from Israel. And on the way, Yaakov was traveling with Yehuda. Yaakov sends Yehuda ahead and says, go ahead and start to set up your shivas in Mitzrayim, so that when I get there, we'll be up and ready to go to learn Torah. So what really happened on Shavuos? Torah was being learned. Mitzvahs were being kept. It's not like, you finish school and you finish high school, or nowadays they do it for pre-1A as well, etc. You have a graduation. And the graduation doesn't actually change anything. Nothing actually happens, but it makes everybody feel good. The valedictorian gets to speak, and the teachers, and give out some awards that you could have given out without a graduation. And the whole point of a graduation, really, and I don't want to take away from the importance of it, because we're humans, and symbolic things and things that lend meaning are important. They're important because we're humans, and that's part of the way that humans are designed. We're designed that these things are important for our life experience. But the bottom line is, a graduation doesn't actually change anything in your education. You don't learn anything at your graduation, except maybe how to pretend that you're actually listening and focused when you're really not. But the point of graduation, it's ceremony to make people feel good. Now, there's no way that Hashem gathered the Jews at Har Sinai and gave the Torah to us just as a ceremony to make us feel good. And now today, almost 3,500 years later, we are having a Yom Tov, and we don't put on tefillin on that day because it's a Yom Tov to commemorate something that was a ceremony, which was just there to make us feel good. It's not the deal. Matan Torah wasn't just there as a ceremony to make us feel good. So what was it there for? The Jews were already learning Torah, were already keeping this. It says both of these are very clear in the Gemara. So what happened? What happened is that the world shifted from beta into fully operational. That was when the universe went live. So what does that mean? What happened? What actually changed? Now, going back to what we were saying before, right, there's a reason that Gashmis and Ruchnis can't interact. There's a reason that physical and spiritual can't interact. And the reason that they can't interact is that they don't, technically speaking, each one doesn't actually exist as far as the other one is concerned. The reason each of them doesn't exist as far as the other one is concerned, and the reason that, that that the physical can't interact with spiritual and the spiritual can't interact with physical is because that's the way the Creator created them. Right? The reason why different parts of an app do or don't interact with each other is because the people who wrote the code that way, whether intentionally or not. That's why things are in beta, because when there was a mess up in the code, people will notice when it's in beta, oh, the app's not working properly. You tell the people who wrote it, and now they can update the code and fix it. Why? Because they wrote the code in the first place. They can update the code and fix it. Now, sometimes it's not so easy to find a bug because they're not the creators of the concept of code. They're the creators of this particular execution of code. But the Creator, God, Hashem, created everything. Hashem created the world of matter, the physical reality. Hashem created spirituality. Hashem created the parameters that keep them separate. And Hashem created the concept that they don't interact with each other. And if He wrote the code, He can update the code. Hashem would change that on a whim because He's the one who made them separate. He didn't have to keep. It's not like physical and spiritual are separate because that's the way they are and there's nothing the Creator can do about it. The Creator created them that way. That's why it's called the Creator. So what changed at Matan Torah was we were keeping Torah before. We were learning Torah and keeping mitzvahs. But we were doing it ourselves. And as people, we're not capable of breaking the rules. It's true that we have a body and a soul. But that's not enough to be able to bring matter and spirit together. That's enough to be the facilitator of it. But it's not enough to get the job done. What we need to get the job done is for the code to be updated. And when the code is updated and the bugs from beta are smoothed out, now it can go live. That's what happened at Matan Torah. Matan Torah, the universe went from being in beta to being live and fully functional. And this is why it's really important at the beginning of the Aseret Dibros, the beginning of Matan Torah, starts with the word Anochi. And Anochi is not actually technically a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for I is Ani. And the word Anochi is not very common, and the reason it's used is the Gemara says, Ein Yaakov actually says this specific version, the variation of the Gemara is a little bit different, but it says, Anon nafshi ksavis yahavis. That's the Rosh Tevus Anochi. Anochi is Aleph Nun Chaf Yud, Anochi. Those four letters, Aleph Nun Chaf Yud, stand for Ana, Nun for nafshi, Chaf for ksavis, Yud for yahavis. Now, what that means, the simple meaning in the Midrash in Yaakov is Hashem says, Anon nafshi, I myself, ksavis, have written the Torah Yahavis and brought it to you. I myself wrote this and gave it to you. It's a gift from me. But Sfarim and Chassidus translate that a little differently. Hashem says, Ana, I, nafshi, my soul, my essence. The same way that our soul is who we are inside, there are, so to speak, layers to Hashem. And Hashem says, Ana, I, nafshi, my soul, the deepest part of me, ksavis, I have written into these words. I have written on Yahavis and placed inside these words. This is Hashem giving us the Torah. The Torah was there before, but Hashem hadn't given it to us. So we were reaching to the Torah, we were learning Torah, we were doing the mitzvahs, but we don't have the ability to bridge things that don't exist as far as each other are concerned. But when Hashem says, I am giving you the Torah and I have placed myself inside these words, when we learn Torah now after Hashem presented it to us, we're not doing something on our own. We're doing it with Hashem behind us. Hashem's now behind those words. Hashem's inside those words. Hashem said, I have written these words and placed myself inside of them. When you learn Torah now, you're learning Torah with me in it. When you do the mitzvahs that are written in the Torah, you're doing mitzvahs with me in them because I've placed myself inside of them. That's what changed at Shavuos. That's what changed at Har Sinai. At Har Sinai, reality went, and this is all reality, it's physical and spiritual because they're both two halves of this picture. Everything that exists, the physical and the spiritual, all transition from being in beta to being fully operational, not just operational, but effectively functional. Because until then, it all existed, but nothing was fully functional. And all the time until then was really preparation because the purpose of existence wasn't actually able to be executed on and fulfilled until then. The purpose of existence is to achieve this novelty, to bring matter and spirit together, to uplift the world, and to bring divinity and godliness and purpose and meaning into every single part of the world. But we can't do that on our own. We're not God. But Hashem is. And when Hashem said, I am now formally giving you the Torah with myself inside of it, now Torah is an accessory. Torah is the code that separated the two. It's also the code that can bring them together. So we have a body and a soul, which means we're capable of interacting with both. We also now have a complete copy of effective code for the app that can bring the two together, which is Torah and mitzvahs. That's what changed on Matan Torah. Matan Torah, the Torah and mitzvahs went from being accessible but not effective. Now, Torah was a very powerful way of connecting to Hashem before, but it wasn't a way of bringing Hashem into the fabric of the material world. That was something that wasn't possible until Hashem said, now I'm formally giving it to you, I'm presenting it to you, and I'm presenting myself to you inside of it. Now you're ready to go. Now every word of Torah you learn and every mitzvah that you fulfill, you have me in it because I've given that to you. That's what happened on Shavuos. And there's a medrash that's quoted a lot by the Rebbe about this there's a few variations of it across Midrash Rabbah and some other places, and it says, it gives a metaphor, a mashal. It says, mashal mahadavadena. What's a mashal, a metaphor for what happened at Matan Torah? Because again, we were learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs before that, so the mashal is, if you have two cities, and the king makes a decree that the residents of these two cities cannot interact with each other. Residents of this city cannot travel to that city, residents of the second city can't travel to the first city. It's what it is, it is what it is, what are you going to do? Then all of a sudden one day the king says, you know what? Decree's over. From now on, you guys can travel. You can travel from one city to the other. You can travel back. It's all good. It's all open. That's what happened on that day. These two cities are the world of matter and the world of spirit, Gashmias and Ruchnias. And they were unable to interact by definition, technically. And then on Shavuos said, you know what? On Shavuos, Hashem said, you know what? The two can come together. You can interact with each other now. So in terms of the experience of Torah and mitzvahs, not necessarily that much changed. But in terms of the impact of Torah and mitzvahs, it changed entirely. And with one word of Torah that we learn today, or one mitzvah that we do today, we can have more impact on the world and more dir b'tachtonim and bring more divinity into the world, into the physical fabric of the world, than everyone for 2,500 years until then. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all of them combined couldn't impact the world the way that we can impact it with one mitzvah. So everything we do has the ability to change the world. Everything we do can have a real impact because of Shavuos. And so now, the world is, we talk about the perhaps we could call it the creative anatomy of the world. So the world is, the term that's used is klipas noiga generally. Klipas noiga means this whatever it is, this entity, this form of, let's call it form of energy for lack of a better term, even though I don't really like that. It seems just fluffy and new age, but haven't got something better off the top of my tongue, it'll have to do. That's kind of mixed. It's a mixed bag. It's effectively neutral. So klipas noiga is, let's call it a sort of creative force, and things can be created by way of this divine creative force. It's not quite the creative force. It's the mask on the creative force, but for simplicity's sake, let's just call it a creative force. And it's effectively neutral, not because there's neither good or bad, but because there's both. It's a mixture of both. And because the two are mixed together, it's neither one nor the other. And so it has potential to go both ways. Now that potential, what happens with that potential is up to us. So anything that exists that's allowed and not forbidden, not prohibited, it's not an avera, things that are averas, non-kosher food, etc., is shalosh kutsatzmeis. It's created by this creative force, which is to some degree entirely negative, and we can't uplift it. There's no kosher way to interact with it. But klipas noiga is the effectively the creative force that makes everything neutral exist. Kosher food, the vast majority, almost everything that exists in the world that you could use somehow permissively, is that a word? Whatever, comes from Klippas Noga. And it has good in it and it has bad in it. Now it's up to us to choose if we want to separate one from the other, which one are we going to uplift and which one are we going to allow to fall away. So when you have kosher food has calories in it. Kosher food has chemicals that have flavors that cause certain experiences that we feel when we eat it, which can cause all kinds of things. And all of those elements can go both ways. For example, I can eat some food. I can absorb the food. My body can extract the calories from that food. Calories are energy. Now I can use those calories for different things. If I use those calories to do a mitzvah, if I use those calories to help someone, to give tzedakah, whatever it is, to do something positive, what I've done is taken the positive side of those calories, lifted it up, extracted it, magnified it, and then whatever negative potential was in those calories now falls away. Because I've cut it off from its life source by magnifying and uplifting the positivity and focusing all the energy that's in this food into the positive side. And if I do the opposite, then the opposite happens. So almost all of the world is made of Klippas Noga. Almost all of the world is effectively neutral because it's a mixture of good and bad, and it's waiting for someone to come along and make that choice to separate the two, uplift the good, let the bad fall away. And every time we do that, we make the world more divine. We bring a little bit more of the Creator into the world. We make the world a little bit holier, a little bit more godly. We bring Hashem into the world a little bit more. And that's why we're here. And that wasn't possible before Torah was given, before Matan Torah. It was possible to connect to Hashem because we have a soul, and when we learnt Torah and did mitzvahs, we would connect to Hashem. But it wasn't possible to take that then and bring that godliness down into the world and connect it with the material of the world. We didn't yet have the tools to make that happen. And on Shavuos, we were given the tools to make that happen. Is the answer now obvious to the question about why the Gemara would say that every time you had a chance to eat some food and you didn't, you have to justify it? Every time there's food in front of us, now, again, like I said, there are many valid reasons not to eat. I'm not saying that everybody always has to eat anything, because I don't think anyone would like that, except maybe doctors who are just in it for the money and are going to become very busy. But there are plenty of valid reasons to not eat food. But the idea is there that anytime we have the opportunity to interact with part of the world for a good reason, and we don't, it's a wasted opportunity. Now, going back in time, as I was talking before about how Hashem created time and space, etc., none of that had to exist. And because originally none of it did exist, the natural state of being of everything is nothing. The natural state of being is Hashem, and that's it. There's nothing else. Because that's the way it was before Hashem actively made things exist. And if you have to actively make something be a certain way because it's not natural for it to be that way, then you've got to keep it there or it's going to go back, right? It's not natural for this cup to be here. It's only here because I'm holding it. Which means that if I let go, it's going to fall because it wasn't natural for it to be there. So if the natural state of being is that nothing exists, then things can only exist so long as Hashem is making them exist. If he stops making them exist, they're not going to exist anymore. Which means that every moment in time that something exists, Hashem is making it exist. Which means that everything at every moment in time must have a purpose or it wouldn't be here. If Hashem didn't think that there was a reason why this cup needed to be here, then it wouldn't be here, because it wouldn't be here without him specifically intentionally making it be here. And the same is true of every single thing that exists. And it's not just true of every single thing that exists, it's true of every single thing that happens. Every incident, everything we encounter, everything we experience happens because Hashem engineers it that way, because there's a reason why it has to happen. There's some sort of potential. There's a purpose that it has And the question is, do we realize that purpose? Do we make it happen?